Brandon Hoffner. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. You are the executive director of the Henry Fork Foundation. Is that correct?
Henry's Fork Foundation. Yes, sir.
Great. You guys work, which is amazing, to stretch our water resource in bringing information and then parties together that all want it. Now, I will tell you, one of the giant problems that I understood from my former state with irrigation and agriculture years ago, I remember it because the governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was governor of California, was talking about it, and I didn't know because I was in my early 20s. He's like, listen, even if I wanted to turn the pumps back on, like we can't get water. There was like some California steelhead that was really important and endangered. And there was this huge fight between, obviously agriculture, conservationists, recreators, developers, all this stuff. Everybody wanted the water and they were just in a locked horns, and it was terrible. But what you guys do is you actually get information, you study watersheds, you study water usage, the whole thing, and then bring this information together with the interested parties and try to determine a win-win situation that preserves enough water for what the actual fish need. It preserves enough water for downstream projects like hydropower. It brings enough water to the farmers and ranchers that need it. And again, you're trying to make this win-win. It's like in the absence of that, people just lock horns and you have a zero-sum game where one guy gets what they want. Either conservationist fish guy gets what they want, or the rancher gets what they want, or Idaho Power gets what they want. But in reality, it's like, no. Let's all wiggle a little bit and fit together and everybody wins.
Yeah. So it was established in 1984, and honestly, we weren't on water that much as the Henry's Fork Foundation back in 1984.
Interesting.
Yeah,
what was it?
It was as simple as, the fishing on the Henry's Fork was great, but it was transitioning from some stocked fishing to a more wild trout fishery, which of course impacts numbers and so forth. And it was also that the Harriman State Park, if you fly down the Henry's Fork, Big Springs puts all the water into the Henry's Fork to begin with. You get a little bit out of the Henry's Lake outlet. A lot of that water is percolating down. It takes 100 years to run through the Yellowstone and Madison Plateau, end up in Big Springs. You do see, just based on pressure and everything else, responses in water in 3-year kind of intervals. But it's this long time situation, and where this is spring fed, so fairly consistent water too, and it runs into Island Park Reservoir, and that was established in 1938. That's when that was built. So
a question for you. So you're saying the water that's coming out of the spring right now started that journey in 1925?
As far as the molecule of water, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So okay, wow, that's wild. Okay, keep going.
Definitely wild. Now the pressure of different water, any given water year, it can raise and lower that spring based on that pressure within kind of that 3 and 4 year cycle. But 100 years or so on a molecule of water. So you got Island Park Reservoir that was established by irrigators in 1938 so that they could irrigate downstream. Also Henry's Lake, and the natural lake in the area, which literally fed fish to the whole, from Salt Lake City to Helena, Montana. They would harvest fish back in the 1800s and ship them via, mule train all over the West. But that lake was then, a dam was put on it. It was raised and increased. So you've got this system of water storage at the upper end of the Henry's Fork Basin, but it's a little bit different, right? It's this kind of flat, volcanic caldera, different geology and different hydrology than most places in the West. In fact, it's kind of unique globally as far as the way the water system works there. Anyway, they put in Island Park Reservoir.
Hang on, let me...
I'm going to keep hitting that thing.
You're good. Watch. We'll do that. We'll tighten this up. Great. Now you can move.
Now I can still talk with my hands a bit. I can't help
You're
it.
right. Just listen, for Lieutenant Governor Betke, I had to raise it like all the way because his right hand's like going the whole time. So next time he comes in, I'm just going to drop a boom from the ceiling. It's just like, go hard, man. Like, whatever you got to do.
I still have to talk with my hands, even if I'm just talking to you.
I love it. Anyway, keep going. So raise up the dams. You have the Henry Lake that's feeding fish everywhere. Okay, so you have this real network of different pressures and whatnot that are utilized for different things.
Yeah. So Island Park Reservoir is all about irrigation for agriculture.
Okay.
It doesn't have flood control issues or rules or anything attached to it that way, like Palisades Dam would, or many, reservoirs and impoundments across the West, right? They've got these multiple uses. Really, it's about irrigation water for farmers downstream in the Henry's Fork Basin there. Now, that doesn't mean that the Bureau of Reclamation that now helps manage the water, they will take flood consideration flood risk consideration into the flows out of there, but that's not what the mandate of that dam is. So when it was put in 1938, it started to change the nature of the Henry's Fork, made it a little bit more like a spring creek downstream, and it changed the flow, the annual flow, the seasonal flows and so forth. But regardless, it was still this fabulous world-class fishery, super productive because it's mid-elevation, right? It's not extremely cold, but it's still cold enough to be a salmonid fishery. And so as you go down from Island Park Reservoir, you hit what they call the ranch. And the ranch was actually the Harriman family, Roland and Gladys Harriman, railroad, barons from New York. That family had the ranch. Roland, his brother Averill actually got Sun Valley, all their Sun Valley properties, and was Secretary of State through World War II. And then Roland, he was a little more, he didn't need to develop as much. Wasn't quite the public figure, and so he liked that ranch there in Island Park that was super quiet. But they ran cattle and I think some sheep even in that country for many, many years. And the railhead got up to the ranch and they would ship their cattle. But in the 60s, they started to talk about, we want to gift this to the state of Idaho. And that was, it ended up, in fact, that gift ended up coming about in the late 70s. And it actually helped establish Idaho Parks Department. The Harriman family said, if we're going to give you this, you have to have a professional park department to run all
right.
this.
If we're going to give you this big gift that we know is going to have problems and you're going to need maintenance, it can't be tragedy of the commons. I want you to have an administrator that's actually going to oversee and make sure it stays pristine.
Exactly.
Got it. And that was the impetus for the Department of Recs for the state.
The State Department of Park and Rec was the impetus for it. They had to be created so that we could get this gift of a 16,000 acre ranch on the banks of the Henry's Fork.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay.
So in fact, their family still lives in this area and interacts with our foundation and folks that work around Harriman State Park.
Dude, hook it up. Get these people. You know what I love about Idaho? One of the many things is that you have people that are very giving and very supportive, and they look to each other and the community to produce these incredible things. And this is a perfect example. It's like, we have this great thing. You can have it. You got to make sure it's really awesome and cool and clean and stays, but you can have this. This is ours and we're giving it to you. God bless it, man. How cool.
Yeah.
Get those people in here. Come on. Put in a good word for me.
We'll see what we can do there.
Okay.
We'll talk to them.
Okay.
But where that was all going is that, because they had managed this ranch and all of their adjoining lands and leases and everything very, very well, but they had managed it a certain way. Well, as the state took it over, it's not that they were mismanaging it. It's just that the management changed. And because the management changed with the cattle grazing, so they were still, leasing that out then to other people. The banks of the Henry's Fork started to become a bit tattered, a bit of erosion issues. And it was just due to the change in the way it was managed, not because it was being abused. But there needed to be some talk around that. What do we need to do as far as management? And actually these concerned anglers then in the Island Park, Idaho area, some of them longtime Idaho residents, some of them, had military careers other places and now had retired in Idaho. Right. So they get together in the Jim and Joan Lanch cabin on the banks of the Henry's Fork and say, we need a foundation, the Henry's Fork Foundation, to start to work on putting up fencing to protect the banks of the Henry's Fork. So that's where it got started.
So that's why you originally weren't in water. You're like, listen, we just needed something to preserve this area because we're losing even, egress and getting into the river. If it all gets deteriorated and destroyed, then we're not going to be able to function effectively recreationally.
Yep.
And so it was all to make sure that you could preserve some fishing stuff in the beginning.
But it quickly went to...
I'm sure. But that's the origin story. That's wild. Okay.
Yeah, that was really the first thing that was out there. Now
some dudes who are retired who want to fish.
But it was the Henry's Fork was, ranked the #1 dry fly fishing river in the United States. It was written in many journals and articles through the 70s and 80s. So it had this world reputation. In fact, to this day, we still have anglers from around the world, Japanese anglers come and they'll catch their first 20-inch rainbow trout on the ranch and they will cry. They're on the banks of the river because it's just a lifelong dream to do that. It's super technical dry fly fishing. So it's very difficult. Folks that don't know what they're doing don't usually do very well there.
You got to remember that thing I told you before we started. Talk to me like I'm 5. What's dry fly fishing?
So
and his 20-inch rainbow trout, that's a big trout, right?
That's a good sized trout. Yes.
Okay. And what's dry fly fishing?
So dry fly fishing is, the whole idea of fly fishing is that you're casting your line, right? You're not casting a lure that's carrying the weight of your cast, right? You're casting a weighted line that then has, these furs and fins, feathers, tied to
the dumb little thing with a tiny hook.
With a hook.
Right.
So dry fly fishing are flies that ride on the top of the water. Gotcha. And the fish come up and eat them off the top of the water.
Gotcha.
There's other types, nymphing, where it's below the water. Streamer fishing, you're making it look like a small fish or something like that you're pulling through the water, right? There's different ways of doing it, but dry fly fishing is usually the most technical. And so in fact, for the Henry's Fork, of course, the fish are extremely important, and fish numbers and populations, all of that is, people are looking at that and thinking about it and talking about it. But just as important is the macroinvertebrates, the aquatic bugs. What's there? When are they hatching? How are they hatching? And so is written about and is studied and thought about and discussed and fought over as the fish themselves. So it's that important to that community.
Well, without one, you're not going to have the other.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if you dry up the food source, the fish are not going to thrive, man.
Yeah. So they started with this, let's protect the banks of the river, so that we continue to have this great fly fishing destination. Quickly though, like Montana Power wanted to put in a hydro facility on Mesa Falls. And if, for anyone that's been to Eastern Idaho and been to Mesa Falls, you've got this volcanic caldera, and that's where the Henry's Fork falls out of the caldera down to the Snake River Plain. And, 2 falls that are just both magnificent. But it was going to essentially kind of dry those up and then backwater a bunch of the river back, towards the Harriman State Park. And so Mike Lawson, one of the shop owners over there, took congressional representatives down the river and showed them what was going on. Rear Admiral James Green got in his best Navy dress up and went before Congress and talked to them about, hey, there's places to put hydro. This is not one of them. And so quickly, that was happening. We were, as a foundation, starting to research, what drives a wild trout population. So Dr. Jack Griffith at Idaho State University, he and his students and others figured out that winter flow was critical. The relationship between winter flow and the trout recruitment was just straight line. The more water you had, the more fish you would have during the winter. That's what, they just needed that winter habitat to survive. And if you didn't have it, those juvenile fish weren't going to make it through the winter. And in fact, to this day, that's still a lot of what we talk about is winter flow. So, it's only gotten more and more complex as we've gone on. But yeah, so it did not start. It started out as kind of fencing and cattle, and now morphed into, very technical science around, the behaviors of watersheds and flows and hydrology and the health, Island Park Reservoir, the health of the water in there. We're seeing blooms in the summer, cyanobacteria and otherwise. And so we're just seeing, degradation of water quality, water quantity. I think you've talked to a lot of people with the Idaho Water Resource Board. I mean, water just in general is tough, right? The amount of water, and even though everyone's, trying to manage it correctly, it's still a difficult situation with the amount of water that we have.
Oh yeah. What is causing the change? Like when you talk about blooms, like what is that? Is that temperature of the water? Is that quantity of water? Is that speed of the water? Like what is causing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where it gets a little sticky, right? Because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of information. And of course, there's a lot of politics and feelings about things around this topic.
Yeah.
But, Dr. Rob Van Kirk, our senior scientist, he's been on the river since 1977. He just put out a 97-page technical report. It's 4 degrees warmer than it was in the 1970s during the summer in Island Park. We have, unfortunately, just because it's a conversion of precipitation, snow and rain to flow, we have 22% less water coming out of that particular basin. Now, we don't think we're seeing quite those same issues like in the higher elevations of the Teton Range for the Upper Snake and the Teton River. There's probably some of that. we don't know for sure, but because of the geology, the topography, the elevation of this, that's kind of what we're seeing. We're just seeing these increased temperatures that are kind of having an impact across the board on evapotranspiration and the conversion of precipitation to stream flow. And then, yeah, Island Park Reservoir is not doing quite as well because it's just warmer. So yeah, you hit it on the head with temperature, but it's not something you really want to dive right into. You don't want to
talk about it. They're like, you were lying in the 70s. They were wrong. What did they know about thermostats?
It's just the facts. That's all I can present there. So
yeah, I actually had Congressman Mike Simpson in here today, and he was very clear. He's like, listen, we're experiencing climate change, and we can all argue about why or what portion of the climate change we have, but like these are the facts, and that's it. Like, you don't have to say, hey, we all need to die categorically as a species of humans because like there's climate change. It's like but we should establish that, hey, what is the temperature now? What was the temperature before? And what do we need to know? And how do we need to adjust? And, things change, everything changes, and the climate is changing. That's just the way it goes.
And it's not just us as anglers or recreational Island Park Reservoir, right? If I talk to my farm buddies around Ashton, Idaho, they tell me about the differences in what they're dealing with now versus the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? It's just they're having to do different things. At one point, they were flying ash on their fields in May to get them to melt off so they could plant them. They don't have to do that anymore, right? So just,
my God.
So it's just these things, timing wise for them and their growing days. But it's not even just temperature for them, right? We talk about all their changes. If you look at summer smoke, it's amazing what summer smoke does to their crop productivity when it hits, right? So there's always these they're dealing with different things than they did back then. And for the Henry's Fork, it's really interesting because kind of from late 60s through the late 90s, we had really consistent water. Temperatures were a little lower, and it was probably this golden era for the fishing there, right? We're probably never getting that confluence of events back together again. So our membership, or the people that remember, the late 70s and 80s, and there's getting to be fewer and fewer of them, but right, we're never going to probably be able to reproduce that for them. For the people that have only been around 10 or 15 years fishing the area, they think it's, maybe not as good as it could be, but it's all right. So it's just perspective too.
It seems like there is an inside and outside of fishing, just with fishing game in general, recreation. It's like there was this harmony that existed in the 70s and 80s that was just bonkers, like an accessibility, an enjoyment, habitats coming together, predation, it was in check, all of these things. So I'm my buddy Brian Brooks, who used to be the executive director of Idaho Wildlife Federation. He's like, listen, yeah, people wax poetic about the hunting from the 80s before wolf reintroduction for elk. He's like, I don't know any different. Like, I started hunting once wolves were already here, and I'm successful every year, and like I move on. But there are people that still say, hey, it used to be great. And there are particular areas like the Lolo Zone and some other things that he brings up. They said, yeah, look, the elk will likely never return there, but it's not just wolves. Even if you eliminated all wolves, you have different nutrient densities and different nutrient sources. You also have different, like they haven't had burns or they have had burns, like all of these different environmental things. It's like, I'm listening to him, my head's going to explode. I'm like, oh my God, like I have no, he's like, yeah, but it's not as simple as this one ingredient screwed everything up. We could eliminate that ingredient and you're still going to have changes in population densities and locations no matter what you do.
Yeah, in a former life, I worked for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and I did, like a 40-mile round trip through the Lolo Zone on the back of a mule, and thought it was going to kill me in one day for sure. But yeah, looking at burns, right, and looking at habitat there, but yeah, the kind of west-wide, the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was the right mix of temperature, right? That was the golden era of mule deer, right? It was there was a lot of good stuff going on. Now, I would still submit, and I submit for the Henry's Fork. As he said, like there's still great hunting opportunities out there yet to be had, right? But access is a little tougher now. That's probably one of the bigger things.
Right.
And we're fortunate on the Henry's Fork as far as a fishery in Idaho with, stream access laws that people can access, right? It doesn't matter what your financial background is. You can find a lot of access in Idaho to go fish and hunt overall, and especially to fish. And so we're very, very fortunate that way. But I've been fortunate in my job to travel around the world and fish kind of other countries and other states and everything else. coming back to Idaho is pretty darn good. I'll tell you that. Yeah. I mean, the South, we work on the South Fork of the Snake, our South Fork initiative. We partner with the folks on the Teton River. Of course, we're working on the Henry's Fork, and there's for my money, not a better place to go in the world to go fishing. As far as a trip, if I have any choice to go anywhere, I will go spend 7 days on the Middle Fork of the Salmon and float down it. And that there's not a better way to spend 7 days. So,
man, I want summer to be here right now. I'm pumped. I have been exploring the state more and more. I haven't been here that long, just over 3 years. And every summer that rolls around, we find something else. Like, God, this is unbelievable. So coming back to really what the Henry's Fork Foundation is engaged in now, you talk about win-win situations with utilizing water and understanding how everybody can win. Give me an example about this, where you have people that are interested in fish winning, people that are interested in grazing and agricultural winning, and the whole bit.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you a couple examples.
Right.
So we were able, like I mentioned, so we do all the science, and then we sit down at the collaborative table. So one of those tables is the Henry's Fork Watershed Council. That was established in 1993, 1994, partly due to the Henry's Fork Basin Plan as part of the State Water Plan being completed. Right. And also because there was some issues in the watershed with some sediments dumps and other things. And the Idaho legislature said, people over there need to be coordinating. And the Henry's Fork Foundation, Fremont Mesa Irrigation District, you need to head something up and co-facilitate it and get people talking and better managing, the water resources. So we were able to build trust through that. So to me, that's just a win in itself, right? Starting back in the early 90s through now, just building relationships and trust. And we can only, a lot of these processes and work can only move at the speed of trust. And that doesn't mean that we don't have conflict, right? I do want to point that out right in that,
sure.
At times we disagree, there's conflict, and then we have to work through it and move on and make things happen. But coming out of that Henry's Fork Watershed Council, then in the early 2000s, there was a conveyance act, the Fremont Mesa Conveyance Act, that actually Mike Simpson worked on, taking some previously federal facilities, the Chester Dam diversion and canal, the crosscut diversion at Chester Dam and canal, and then the Teton groundwater exchange pumps, and moving those over to Fremont Mesa Irrigation District. And through that bill, we created the Drought Management Planning Committee. And so there's the North Fork Reservoir Company, Fremont Mesa Irrigation District, the Henry's Fork Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, and I'm going to miss one there, but those are the signatories on that Drought Management Planning Committee. So we get to sit down together and look at, we do it 2 or 3 times a year and look at what the situation is now and talk about management of water and what could work. Our role, we just try and bring the modeling and science that we have through our water quality monitoring network, through our science team and Dr. Van Kirk, his models, just kind of looking at what do things look like? What are we prognosticating for the upcoming winter or the upcoming summer, and then talk about what might work for everybody as far as, farms and fish. And I think,
you got a lot of $10 words, my guy. Prognosticating. Wait, is there a C in that? The prognosis, I get it.
Yeah, the outlook for the winter.
No, I love it. Listen, I'm who somebody said that about Brian Brooks. It's like this guy had emailed me. He's like, I really like Brian. He's got a lot of $10 words. And it's like you and Brian have this beautiful way of explaining conservation. I mean, obviously you're very well researched and read, but it just cracks me up. It's like, God bless it, man. Like these are the things we say.
Well, honestly, my communications and outreach director would be like, you got to stop that right now. You got to dial it back, Brandon.
Oh my God. So, did you, and I'm unaware of I'm ignorant of your past. Did you go through like formal education for conservation as well? I mean, because Brian had I believe he was going to BSU for something, and he was like, this sucks. And his advisor's like, well, go do something fun this weekend and come back. And he goes out, and the advisor's like, what'd you do? He's like, I went fishing. And he's like, great. Like, take this, go to this department, like go start studying this. And he ends up getting a master's in conservation. And along the way, just, really he was like, look, I love this. This is great. Like, let's study this more.
Yeah. I mean, my background was wildlife ecology and range ecology, although I spent a lot of time in the Colorado State University Fish Lab too. So
that's awesome.
But I mean, we have I am kind of the dumb one on our staff because we've got, 19 employees, 3 of them are PhDs. We've got many masters, right. It's, we have a very high achieving, high caliber staff. So maybe they rub off on me a little bit.
Unfortunate for you that I'm not part of your staff, because I would certainly take the cake with the dumb one. I have, I'm going to have Dr. Jared Talley on again soon. The big fan of his, as far as, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a different conversation. That's a different ecosystem. But speaking of rangeland, do you guys worry about, destruction of ecosystems and areas from rangeland fires and whatnot in your area as well, or not as much?
That we are definitely concerned about the surrounding landscape and changes on that landscape. And if you look back at like the 1988 Yellowstone fires, that probably played a role in the development of some of our, water issues now as far as how the forest has come back. But you could also look at forest management as far as clear cutting in that area and so forth, maybe how that played a role, and just succession of forests, right? But most of our surrounding landscape, the range piece is kind of separated from us. It kind of goes from forest right into more tilled agriculture.
Gotcha.
And so we don't have as much of an interface. Now down, if you get to the lower Henry's Fork, between St. Anthony and Rexburg, there's definitely quite a bit of irrigated, flooded pasture down there.
Got it.
But not, not the true rangelands that you think of as those rangeland fires with sagebrush and everything else. That's kind of, it's right there, but it's somewhat removed from what we're doing.
Gotcha. So. For people that want to support the Henry's Fork Foundation, are you guys funded through grants and stuff, or like how do you continue existing, preserving this ecosystem?
Yeah, so we have.
We had our USAID grant frozen, actually.
I didn't even say that. Well, we can get to that, but we've got 20.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call you out. I was speaking with somebody yesterday. Like, oh my God, our grants got frozen. It's like, oh no, like that's terrible. I don't have grants. So like, meh.
Yeah. And historically, so we have 2,500 members.
Oh,
most of those folks being fly fishermen. Some of them fund us at a extremely high level. So we're very fortunate that way. I would have told you, a few months ago that our upcoming annual budget was about $4.2 million. But I don't know what's going to happen with those grants right now. So it might be less than that. But right now, we will figure it out.
Sure.
Maybe we won't do things exactly how we thought we were going to do to them. But yes, we're going through that. But historically, we almost operated entirely on private philanthropy. And then we started to add in, right? Like, okay, we can leverage our spending on our positions within the foundation and whatnot, and gather some grant money and do more and bigger projects than we've done before. And in fact, we're kind of waiting to hear on it's a project called DIRT, Developing Infrastructure to Reduce Temperature and Turbidity at Island Park Reservoir.
And turbidity?
Yeah.
What's turbidity?
So that has to do with the clarity of the water.
Okay.
So what,
you want it crystal clear.
We maybe not crystal clear, but we want it fairly clear. That's
temperature
better.
And turbidity.
Yeah. So
infrastructure and reducing temperature and turbidity.
Yeah. So infrastructure being, can we oxygenate the water to make it better quality water in Island Park Reservoir? Can we put what they call a variable withdrawal tower, essentially being able to decide where you want to take water from the water column in the reservoir to optimize temperature and turbidity. So those, it was a planning study, right? So we could gather information about how that might work.
Gotcha.
It was about a $1.7 million project, and right now it's a little bit in limbo. So
you're gonna bury that one under the dirt. See what I did there? I'm pretty clever. Yeah. I was just talking to somebody about the nature of Idaho as I see it is just this wonderful, pragmatic, we got to work this out. We got to figure this out. We got to figure out a way forward to get to accomplish the goal that we need to get the outcome we need. And it's not a state that I've seen from a civilian standpoint where it's like, okay, we need to work on this, where it's like, well, we can't do any of this because we're not getting federal grants. And again, I don't know anything about your organization, but when you were like, look, we're classically funded through philanthropy. It's like, yep, that makes sense. Like, I understand that you have people that care very deeply about what we have here in the state, and they're willing to, support it financially. And okay, great. Like, there you go.
Yeah. It's like 25% of our members are from Idaho, 25% from Utah, probably about 25% from California. And then Texas, there's a large contingent there. And then, Colorado, Montana, places that people, fly fish the West from. But we have members in all states that help support us. And so, yeah, I mean, we would rather have those grants and be able to move forward with all that work, but we will figure out how to adjust and move if they don't come back around to us. So.
Are you guys worried at all about the quagga mussels?
Oh yeah, no, we were definitely, we're watching that very closely. It's not something we're studying, but we have, the Idaho Department of Agriculture folks come and present at our Henry's Fork Watershed Council, talk about it, right? Stay on it. We've actually used our summer interns in the past to help them monitor at Henry's Lake. So it is something we've invested some time and energy in the past, and we're glad the legislature and other folks are
taking it seriously.
Taking it seriously now.
I've been trying to get Director Tewalt on. I saw her director of media today at this Fair Idaho event. And I'm like, I'm trying to get your director on, and she's so busy. I've met her once randomly in just going to a parking, trying to find my car in a parking garage, and she's like, "Oh, you're Matt." I'm like, "Oh my God, you." She's like, "I'm not avoiding you," because I had text messaged her. She's like, "I'm not avoiding you," but yeah, what a thing. We lose if that takes hold. We lose. An ungodly amount of what makes this state awesome.
No doubt. And so hopefully, fingers crossed that, the treatments continue to work, and, tough to have to be that, it has to be that deadly to treat it, but that's what was necessary. And I'm glad that folks banded together. And the whole effort. Yeah, I think that's a prime example of so many different levels of government and, otherwise working together and collaborating. That was just a grand example. You asked me earlier about what have we achieved through our collaboration, and we've had quite a bit of fun talking about stuff. But I did want to point out that Island Park Reservoir. So I mentioned winter flow for trout recruitment. Well, one way to get more winter flow is to have a smaller hole to fill when you get to the winter, as far as the reservoir, right?
Got it. Okay.
Because our inflows are going to be fairly well set by that, the springs. Unfortunately, because of recent conditions, they are fairly low right now as far as those incoming flows. But having a smaller hole to fill is beneficial to us. So we've been able to work with the irrigators because they have a desire to store water as high as possible. And we don't want to. Right. I think you mentioned in one of your recent podcasts, maybe with Jeff Raybould, about this paradox of efficiency, right? Efficiency paradox, where if you're too efficient, sometimes it hurts groundwater. But right, we want to be cognizant of all those things. But we're working with them where we've set a goal at the bottom of the bottom of the Henry's Fork, 350 CFS at the Parker gauge. That allows all the irrigators to divert all the water they need to divert, but it keeps things kind of consistent down there. And it just allows us to measure such that we've conserved about 25,000 acre feet of water. Now an acre foot, oh boy, that's like
it's like a football field filled with water a foot up.
Exactly. Perfect. For those of us that have played on a football field, yes, that's a great way to think of it. And so 25,000 of those in a 135,000 acre foot reservoir, we feel like that's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
That does increase winter flow.
Dude, the water call was over 71,000 acre feet. So if you're saying you're able to store an extra 25,000 acre feet, it's like, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's not that we're actually extra storing it. We're just kind of carrying it over. So we're redistributing the flow of that water downstream. Now that still has to work in the Bureau of Reclamation's planning. It has to work in Fremont-Madison Irrigation District's planning, but what's interesting, that comes out of all of that is that, the Henry's Fork Foundation has to take notice and become involved in kind of southern Idaho water management, whether it's spill at Milner and, the 600,000 acre feet last year that goes past that a lot of us would have liked to have seen not go past in that manner.
That was, what that was part of? That was like a gem in the crown of the cobalt mine conspiracy people. They're like, they let 600,000 acre feet of water go right by. They didn't even care. And then the federal government came in and shut them down because they're trying to increase your reliance on industrial farmers. They're trying to take out. And I was like, God bless you guys. Those videos are still coming out.
I have no doubt.
I had Paul Arrington, the president of the Water Users Association. He sent me one recently. He's like, dude, they're still getting play. And you have these just idiots who are, I'm highly convinced they are intentionally that like, all you have to do is Google like where the Eastern Snake Plains Aquifer is. You got to Google where Jervois, right? Cause like Jervois, the mining company, yeah, they do have a cobalt mine on the Snake Plains Aquifer, which has not been in operation since 2019. Like everybody knows it's close. And they do have another one up off the Salmon, just like it's, what is it? Like Blackbird Creek or some creek? I don't know. Whatever you say.
North of Salmon.
Yeah, exactly. Like way up there. And yeah, these are completely different parts of the state. And the idea that it's like, I can't even get into it. It's like, it's so great. And people are like, no, man, it's the feds. I'm like, I don't think it's the feds. I don't think.
Well,
no, I'm probably a shell. So you know what somebody told me recently? They're like, you're like a deep state psyop. And it was hilarious because they're like, wait, for which way? Like, which way am I leaning? They're like, well, it was hilarious. He's like, well, the problem is you're really good. It's like, God bless you, sir. I just want to know, like, which side am I polling for?
Yeah.
Like, I can't have both parties in here and be polling secretly for both, like one side or it's like, am I polling for both sides? Am I like a triple agent?
Yeah, that would be something, right? That'd be really, really good.
That'd be a win-win-win.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So our membership, right, is we had to make this, change, and instead of just focusing on Harriman State Park and the ranch, and we start to look at water management throughout eastern Idaho. That was a bit of a challenge for some of them, right? Because they just couldn't see, well, why are you working on water issues downstream? Well, it's because Island Park Reservoir doesn't operate in a vacuum. And Palisades is, for our South Fork initiative, that's, one of the largest reservoirs in the system, right? And so you have to take note and work on these more regional issues to impact, the mission that we're trying to impact. And so
you can't be siloed. You can't say like, okay, I only care about this 2 miles worth of river. It's like, no, man. Like now you're concerned with the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. So the entire watershed. So that's been a challenge for us. But yeah, just, 25,000 acre feet of water conserved. We recently worked with one of our local canal companies, Conant Creek Canal, right? It's within that Fremont Madison irrigation district, but we helped them line their canal. Now we had done the
what about incidental recharge?
Yep, of course. Right.
So you become more efficient by lining the canal so that water does not seep through the canal and go back into the aquifer, and more is carried down to the actual target destination. However, that does put pressure on the recharge because now you're delivering to a different spot and not recharging the aquifer.
So I heard in your podcast all about that. Yeah. Now, of course, we did the research, right? And in this particular instance on this canal, the attenuation time and everything else, there's not an impact
on... That's another $10 word. What's attenuation?
So the time that water spends as it travels either down to the, from the canal back to the creek in this, Conant Creek, or into the aquifer.
Okay, great.
Right. And the amounts of water, you're just not seeing this impact to the aquifer in any real way. But you are seeing in real time at the moment, substantial impacts to Conant Creek fishery and to the farmers trying to get enough water to irrigate off of Conant Creek Canal. Got it. So it made sense. So you have to imagine, right, also that this is a canal essentially on the side of a mountain that is, it's 6 miles. It's losing half of its water because it's so porous. It's just not working, as I said, for the farmers or fish. So we helped. It was about a $2.5 million project. We used some USBR, the Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart funding. The Idaho Water Resource Board contributed about $500,000 to it. We brought in some of our own private dollars to work on it. But now we're keeping more water in Conant Creek, which essentially, of course, it makes Conant Creek better, right? It makes that a more healthy fishery in the summer because now it's got another 10 or 13 CFS in it. And you can, kind of back calculate that for Island Park Reservoir, that's probably conserving about 2,300 acre feet of water in Island Park Reservoir, that because it's flowing down Conant Creek and heading down and can now be used by other downstream water users, right? It doesn't have to come from Island Park Reservoir. That's, it's a little squishy, but it generally kind of works. But then the farmers also, right? They now have the water they need consistently for their irrigation practices for their pumps, and they gain some more water too.
Right. Because you can just say in the abstract, recharge is good, but it's like, yeah, that's true. Recharge is good, but it's not. It's not always. every single piece of recharge is not necessarily better than the consequences of having that incidental recharge. Every single instance where you have a leaky canal, the loss of that incidental recharge is not always that substantial. And there is potentially a really big case, argument case for, again, hatcheries and then commercial utilization of water that justify. It's like, okay, look, you're going to lose 6 miles worth of recharge on this one canal. Okay. But all of this ag wins and those fish win. So like, come on, man.
Yeah, right. It's a site specific decision.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we are huge fans of leaky canals throughout the Henry's Fork and the South Fork, right? That definitely, there's a whole bunch that we want to see them continue to leak because they provide, right? The Henry's Fork is a working river, and it's this phenomenally productive working river. And the South Fork kind of the same way, and the Teton, right? They provide a lot of benefit to the state of Idaho, yet there's still these fantastic fisheries, but we have to continue to work to ensure that they remain that way. Now, the Henry's Fork fishery, its economic impact with outfitters and everybody else, right? Even second homeowners, somewhere $30 to $50 million. We've done some studies on that. Of course, that pales in comparison. I think I saw an ad with Bear Industrial that they had pegged Idaho agriculture at $20 billion, and if you figure the bulk of that's in southern Idaho, right? So it just pales in comparison to that, and what the cities need and everything else. But if you go to Island Park, Idaho, that $30 to $50 million is huge as far as the economy of Fremont County and whatnot. So, just trying to. That's kind of what we do, right? We try to make sure there's access. We try to educate people. We try to make sure they understand the fishery. And then we hope that we can work together collaboratively through, kind of trust these relationships that we've built over time and come up with win-win situations. I mean, we all like to eat and a few of us like to fish. Let's hope we can do all those things together and continue to enjoy just a spectacular place.
God bless you, sir. Listen to me. I appreciate you. I would love to come and see this in action this summer if I can.
You want to go fishing?
I do. I want to come fishing. I want to see this again. I want to travel the state and understand more of what makes this state what it is. And I talk to so many people about rangeland and predators and fishing. And it's like, I spend my whole day in this basement. So I want to come see this, and I want to, hopefully have you on again and talk about it after we do that. Or maybe, you know what I'll do? Maybe I'll bring the equipment and we'll just do a podcast like on the riverbank.
Yeah.
That'd be lit.
We can do it. Well, I don't know. Can we get the sound right on the riverbank? We've done them right in our buildings. We actually took the old Ashton Hospital that was built in 1949 and we refurbished it as the Henry's Fork Foundation Community Campus. And so we have some places in there where we can set up.
Yeah, dude, wherever. Like we'll take B-roll down at the river. We'll take actual shots of it. You can walk me around and like show me things. We'll take video of that and then weave it into the podcast.
Okay, great. So have you picked up a fly rod before?
Yes, in someone's backyard. My presentation was dead on, by the way.
Okay.
I was like, I got good hand-eye coordination. Did you see that Theo Vaughn thing with Rogan? He's like, "Hey, fish." It's like it's very hetero. What is that? He's like homoerotic. He's like, what? He's like, "Hey, fish." Theo Vaughn, man, his like the way he comes up, it's like, how did you put these things together? But different guy. Listen to me, Brandon. I appreciate you. Thank you for what you're doing for Idaho. Thanks for what you're doing for Foundation, and let's do this again.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt.